Okay. Welcome to today's GreenGov and Penn State Sustainability Series webinar, Forestry in Penn's Woods, Managing for Health and Resilience in a Changing Climate. I'm Mark Hand, GreenGov Council Director. And before we get started, I just want to talk a little bit about GreenGov. The GreenGov Council began in 2019 as a program to help the Commonwealth lead by example on environmental sustainability, working towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions from our agency operations. And so Commonwealth agencies have been making great progress on items like increasing energy efficiency in buildings, installing charging stations, switching to electric vehicles, constructing green buildings, using renewable energy systems wherever possible. And GreenGov's also been involved in a number of other items this past year or so, and it's been taking some time to develop. And of course, we know good things take time. So we're hoping that in 2026, we'll be able to highlight some new things that we're working on. And some of those items include, we're working on working to set building performance standards in Commonwealth facilities. We're looking to publish high performance building criteria for new construction projects. We're in the middle of developing waste audit processes and procedures for government facilities. And we've just recently taken up, or are in the process of taking up, a new project that we're working on sustainable procurement policy, and just to investigate it and see if we can do more with our procurement and state government. So all these things are hopefully coming, available in 2026, and looking forward to talking more with you about those items. We're also looking forward to building on the partnership started with Penn State around the important mission of Prepare PA. 8 Commonwealth agencies came together to help provide initial funding support for Prepare PA. And Prepare PA aims to equip Pennsylvanians with the knowledge, tools, and resources they need to adapt, respond, and thrive in the face of a changing climate and environmental uncertainty that it brings. So there's much more to come in spring of 2026. I'm sure maybe Peter will have some more to say about this as well. During the when the presentation is started, we'll circulate a place where you can sign up to receive more information on Prepare PA, and hopefully you'll join us in some of those events in 2026. So lots of hopefully new items coming your way, and looking forward to talking with you more about them. But for now, I'd like to welcome our partner and co-host with the series, Peter Boger. Sustainability Week is co-sponsored and supported by Penn State University and Peter Boger. Peter is the Director for Engagement and co-leader of Sustain Penn State, one of 3 offices that comprise Penn State Sustainability. He is responsible for helping Penn State articulate and implement its vision for sustainability engagement, helping advance student success through creation of high-impact student engagement opportunities, and helping Penn State advance its land-grant mission through efforts that make Pennsylvania communities more resilient. Welcome, Peter, and good afternoon.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I will be brief because I don't want to take away from our speaker. But yeah, I wanted to thank you all for joining us as we are in the midst of webinar series 7. This has been a partnership of 6 years now between Penn State Sustainability and the GreenGov Council. And it originally emerged really because at the time when we started this, a lot of people were talking about the fact that sustainability is such a broad topic that there were plenty of people in state government, in our universities, in municipal governments who didn't really grasp the whole totality of what sustainability is. And the fact that all of us are probably in some way working on sustainability, no matter what our field is, that when you see sustainability as the intersection of people, planet, profit, and peace, that pretty much takes in most of our work and provides opportunities for us to think about sustainability more creatively. And so through this series that we've been offering with GreenGov, we really have been trying to bring together a community across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to learn more about sustainability, to think creatively about how we can build partnerships and find new opportunities. We're especially excited for today's talk. I think in some ways the genesis for this came at last year's Climate Solutions Symposium at Penn State University, where I was in a session with Matt and Mark, and our session leader was asking everybody to sit in small groups and talk about what is fundamental to Pennsylvania. And when you come down to it, the name Pennsylvania means Penn's Woods. And our forests are perhaps some of the most fundamental things about Pennsylvania, and that really got us thinking a lot about the importance of forestry. And so that's why we're excited to have you join us today for our speaker. So I'll turn it back over to Mark.
Excellent intro, Peter. Thanks. And I completely agree, and I'm looking forward to this presentation as I am trying to manage my own small forest here. So for today, let's jump into the presentation. And again, forestry in Penn's Woods, managing for health and resilience in a changing climate. And I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Seth Cassell. And Seth is the state forester, director of Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources in the Bureau of Forestry. And in his role, he is responsible for leading 800 people who manage over 2 million acres of state forest system that conserve and are stewards and enhance Commonwealth's trees, forests, and native wild plants. Seth has served the Bureau of Forestry in various roles since 2000 in field forestry, urban forestry, communications, land acquisitions, and resource planning. Seth graduated from Penn State in 1998 with a BA in journalism and a minor in wildlife and fisheries science. And in 2002, he earned a master's of forest resources from Penn State. He and his wife, Amy, live in northern Dauphin County with their 2 children and an English setter on a 25-acre farm that they're restoring with native grasses and trees. And Seth's hobbies include grouse hunting, fly fishing, vegetable gardening, woodworking, and playing guitar and banjo. So I'm looking forward to this presentation, and I think we're going to have a really interactive Q&A after this. And so, Seth, please feel free to take it away and welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Definitely appreciate the introduction, and Peter, appreciate the partnership with Penn State, and just thank the whole Green Gov effort for inviting me here today, representing the Bureau of Forestry and all that trees and forests mean to Pennsylvania. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And thank you all for joining too. I know it's the traditional lunch break, and I'm grateful that we have so many people who want to learn more about trees and forests. And as Mark said, looking forward to having a dialogue afterwards, and happy to answer all the questions you might have.
And Seth, your slides are up and they look good.
Okay, so. Great. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. So today I'm going to, obviously we have the title, and I'm going to go through a little bit about what is a healthy, resilient forest, and going to talk about the Bureau of Forestry's new strategic plan, and we're going to go through some different highlighted work just to emphasize a little bit of looking ahead, and end it with what you all can do to be part of helping keep our forests healthy and resilient in that changing climate. So this presentation is going to be going to go over some broad concepts, but we also want to not only talk about the broad concepts, but also the specific work that we do. And I saw on the list of people who are on, we have some members of our Bureau of Forestry team, just outstanding public servants. The work that we do in the Bureau of Forestry isn't possible without our dedicated natural resource professionals who do that work. So we want to highlight that work, but also the work of our partners like Penn State and others that we'll mention throughout here, that the partners that we have are really important to getting that work done. So it's going to be conceptual, but also kind of dive down a little bit to what does this mean, and looking forward to any questions when we're done with the presentation. Okay, so starting off, thinking about, Peter really highlighted it. One of the things that's just so special about Pennsylvania is our forests, and obviously our name, Penn's Woods. And I really I always like getting ideas from other folks, but Peter talked about a forest being fundamental. I think I might have to use that in our vernacular, because he is absolutely right. Like the sense that our forests are fundamental. What are the things that tie us together? When you look out in the landscape, I mean, you look out across Pennsylvania, what's one thing that really ties us together? Our communities, our people, our landscape, and really forests, and even our history and heritage is so important here in Pennsylvania. We are a forested state, almost 60% forested, and that comes up to 16.6 million acres. And there are so many things that we enjoy from our forest. Some of them are kind of in front of you, and some other ones it takes a little bit of thinking to realize those values. But wood products, and I say that right now. I'm sitting on an ash chair on a white pine table with oak flooring. And a lot of households are like that across Pennsylvania. Wood is just part of our everyday life and the products that they produce. Also, ecological resources. Our ecosystem is a forested ecosystem. Many of us recreate in the forest, enjoy scenic driving or just walking along a trail or hunting and fishing, doing so many things in our forests. And of course, our water. Everybody needs clean water, and our forests, one of the reasons our water is so clean is because of the forest that we have here in Pennsylvania. Tremendous amount of habitat for wildlife and plants, and also our human health. More and more studies come out that people their blood pressure drops when they're in a wooded environment. There's things like forest bathing, just going out in the forest to reduce stress, and we have people requesting to do yoga classes on our state forests. So many ways that forests promote human health and well-being, and we can't lose sight of that piece because quality of life is really important wherever you live, and our forests and recreation and human health really add to that. But when we're thinking about climate and resilience, I think one of the interesting things about our forests is our forests are very much impacted by a changing climate. So when we talk about resilience, we have to actively manage our forests to maintain that health and resilience in a changing climate. But also, our forests are a solution to that very same climate change that's impacting the forest. Our forests are big stores of carbon, and they do it for free. Every day, they're working hard to store carbon and to mitigate the carbon in the atmosphere and mitigate climate change. So sometimes when we're thinking about forests, we look at it from that resilience. What can we do to maintain the health of the forest in that changing climate? But also, what can we do to make sure it continues to store carbon to be that mitigating factor in climate change overall? All right, so in the conversation today, in the title, we talk about resilient health and resilience, and those two terms are really linked. And wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about what when we say resilient forest, what do we mean? And there are a lot of different definitions out there. And so I was actually thinking about this yesterday. I've been in the office a lot, kind of commuting, and yesterday I said I want to go for a run. So I went for a run on our property in the forest. So again, talking about the human health connection. And I was actually thinking about this, and I was thinking about what is resilience. And as I was running, I started thinking about something else. I was thinking about my knee because I don't really run all that much, and my knee started to get a little bit sore. And I remembered. It's sore because when I was 15, I was in a sledding accident in northern Pennsylvania, and it's kind of bothered me my whole life. And it kind of dawned on me about, there's some parallels to what resilience is, thinking about a forest versus thinking about a human body. Something happened to my knee. There was a disturbance. There was an injury. And, my knee has, it's made it, right? I'm still out there running. But it's sore. It gets sore sometimes. It impacts me, but my knee is still working as a knee, even though there's noted change and it impacted it. It's still going forward. And so I thought about that with the forest. It's very similar where, something happens to a forest, there's a disturbance, and it changes the forest. The change is undeniable, but the forest is able to keep functioning and going forward, being a forest and doing all the things that forests do. Able to absorb that change and bounce back. It's a changed forest, but it's still a functioning forest. And I think there's a lot of parallels we can draw with different analogies of that, but that's really what it comes down to. A change that happened in the early 1900s in Pennsylvania, we lost a chestnut. And our forests have been irrevocably changed with that non-native blight that came through. But the forests have gone on and continued to function. And because of the diverse forest, we still have very healthy forests, but we have changed forests, but it was able to be resilient and absorb that change. Now, so I think as we go forward, there's more and more change, there are more and more impacts, and we still have very resilient forests, but there's definitely the question of how much more change can the forest absorb? How much more reorganization can take place when it can be healthy in the future, but also provide all the values and benefits that we've come to enjoy and expect from the forest. So the ability of the forest to absorb change, absorb a changing climate, and still continue to provide all the functions is how we can look at it. But it's something that doesn't happen automatically. We need good forest management to make sure our forests continue to be healthy. And we need planning and intentional management. And so in the Bureau of Forestry, things like our State Forest Resource Management Plan that accounts for resilience and health and climate change. We have some forest carbon management principles in the Bureau of Forestry that we drafted. DCNR has a climate action plan that is just being rewritten. We've had it for many years, but now we're rewriting it and adapting it and looking across all the bureaus and functions within DCNR, including the Bureau of Forestry, and thinking what do we have to do to maintain those healthy forests, that resilient forests, and adapt to climate change. And we also have things like our community forestry programs, working with private forest landowners. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But it takes intentional planning to get that work done to keep our forests healthy and resilient. And one of the ways that Bureau of Forestry is addressing these is we're going to start off just talking about our new strategic plan. We wrote a new strategic plan to address a lot of the modern issues that we have and are facing, kind of peeking across the horizon and thinking about where we need to be as an organization. And we have a vision of having healthy and abundant and resilient trees, forests, and native wild plants in Pennsylvania. But we know that it takes more than that. We need people who are engaged. We need people who are interested in being part of that conversation, being part of that work to make sure our forests are healthy and resilient, to do that active stewardship work. So we need to do all those things to achieve our vision. So it takes that holistic effort. My slides aren't advancing the way I'd like them to.
We're on mission right now. Yep.
Okay. We have a mission that supports that vision, how we're going to get the work done. And we've boiled it down into strategic priorities, which would talk about in the context of the presentation, the title of the presentation here. We have these strategic priorities that we're trying to advance as an organization: strengthening our resource management foundations, growing our work around people and communities, and investing in our people and teams. And we're going to hit each of those priorities. So when thinking about our resource management foundations, and we talked a little bit about what a healthy, resilient forest is, there are things when we're thinking about what is a resilient forest. One of the main things, we're looking across the whole state and those foundational forests. One of the best things we can do when we're thinking about climate, whether or not resilience or climate storage or carbon storage, is keeping forests forested. That 58% of forest land that we have, we should not take for granted. During different times in our history, it was much lower than 60%. And some of the data that we're seeing, we're starting to chip away at that foundation that we have in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of competing land uses when we look out across Pennsylvania, the different types of industrial, residential development, and energy development. All those things can displace forests. Agricultural lands. I mean, interesting thing is sometimes with agricultural lands, we actually gain forests through reverting agricultural lands, and sometimes we lose them to agricultural land uses. So it's this big picture that changes and shifts over time, but keeping the forest that we do have is really important as really the basics. And it's very basic, but it's not as easy in practice when we look at some of the landscape dynamics going on out there. It's also very important that we look at our forest from a landscape perspective. So what does that mean? We want landscapes that promote diversity in a lot of different ways. When we talk about forest, we often talk about the forested stand. It's something like it's 100 or 200 or more acres. What's going on there? But we really have to look out across landscapes, thousands of acres, looking at what's going on across ownerships. Because often, if you just look at that one area, you're not seeing the whole bigger picture. And so, one example of that is thinking about the role of older forests. With carbon storage, we know that older forests do a really good job storing carbon. We're going to talk about this a little bit later. But if you're not watching what's happening on a landscape level, you could have some forest health pathogens or insects that are affecting those older forests. Maybe they're not going to live as long as we want them to, and we have to go in and take intervention. Or maybe because of this impact, it's a good time to go and harvest that and to start a new forest under those older trees. So you have to look at that, what's happening on that landscape level, because you can wish for older forests all you want, but if you're not actually achieving it across the landscape, you might not be as successful as you think. So looking at balance across a forested landscape, having lots of older trees, having lots of younger trees as well, having trees of all different ages, so you have some built-in resilience and different forests where you can do different kinds of work and manage for different values in ecological conditions. So looking at a landscape approach is really important. And things like regeneration. Foresters talk a lot about regeneration. What we're really talking about are younger trees. What is that next forest? We rely on natural regeneration in Pennsylvania. And so when you're looking at what's that next forest, and when you take walks, you can look out and see the seedlings, having that diversity. And when we talk about diversity, we want diverse ecosystems. We want diverse forest types. We want diverse forest species out there. We talked about the chestnut blight and the impact of that. And one of the great things about the eastern deciduous forest, there's so many species. How do we maintain those species? Because it really helps with our resilience as a forest, with our forest as a whole. But also things like genetic diversity. Do we have genetic diversity that allows our forest to adapt over time? So diversity is really important. The regeneration, the young forest, the next forest is really important. But also, like when managing forest health, we have programs in our Bureau of Forestry where we spray for spongy moth. That is a big impact where if you have older red oak trees, red oak does a great job storing carbon. They store carbon in their trunks and in their root systems and in the branches. Red oaks do a great job storing carbon. But if they are impacted by a non-native insect, they might not live as long as they could otherwise. So make sure, do what we can to manage those health impacts is really important. Invasive species are a big impact on health and resilience. They can inhibit that natural regeneration, that next forest, but also they can inhibit the best vegetation for storing carbon on the site. So you think about if there's let's just say there's 10 acres and there are invasive shrubs, maybe some invasive honeysuckle that's preventing those oak trees from growing and getting established. Over time, not only is that not a really healthy native forest, but it's also not storing carbon and working the way we need it to in this modern age. We need those areas to be growing trees and offering the best capacity we have to store carbon. And the non-native shrubs are not the answer to storing carbon. We need native trees to store carbon. So being able to manage and in some cases remove invasive species is really important to having those healthy forests and maximizing carbon storage. All right, we talked a lot about that diversity across the landscape. There are a lot of ways that when you're managing a forest, you have to look at the ecological resources. And soil and wetland protection is really important when it comes to carbon management. Wetlands across our forests, they store a lot of carbon. So whenever we're managing forests, we have to make sure we're taking steps for soil conservation, but also wetland conservation, so they can continue to go forward and store that carbon. It's always important for us to be constantly evaluating our best management practices. The science is changing a lot with climate and resilience management, but also carbon storage. And there's a lot that we don't know, so we have to, approach our work with humility as we try to understand some of the best practices. So it'd be very interesting in 5 years from now, if someone else is giving this presentation, some of the information and practices might look very different. But conserving native biodiversity, ecological management, old growth conservation is really important. Like we said, those larger trees and those older forests do a really good job storing carbon, but they need to be healthy and resilient to do that. Also, our younger forests do really well at sequestering carbon, pulling carbon out of the atmosphere into the leaves, into their younger trees. The older forests do better at storage. The younger forests do better at that active sequestration. So having a younger forest in the landscape is really important, and having that mixed with the old growth forest as well. So we in the Bureau of Forestry always promote that balanced approach, having a balanced landscape of older forests and younger forests. And by the way, the younger forests will be the older forests many years into the future. So that old growth conservation, but also making sure we have healthy young forests as well. We also have to, as we looked at our forests and how we make them more resilient, genetics is really important. Looking at our seed sources. So when you think about the changing climate, how can we plant trees? How can we plan for younger forests that will not only be able to deal with the stresses and the changes today, but also the changes that might happen in 50 years? And so we're doing a lot of work and looking forward with some of the genetics of our seeds. So when we're growing trees in our nursery and planting in areas where we know there are going to be climate impacts in the future, how are we looking at those seeds to make sure we're sourcing them in ways that we know that they're coming from an area that's going to help that forest adapt? So in the simplest terms, and it's often more complex than this, but in the simplest terms, you don't necessarily want, if you're planting, say, trees in northern Pennsylvania, you want to get seeds from an area a little bit farther south. So as the climate changes, those trees will be better adapted for a future climate. Again, it's often more complex than that, but just looking at seed sources, looking at genetics, and making sure we're being thoughtful about the genetic diversity and variations that will help our forest adapt in the long run. And then also site restoration and reclamation. From a forestry perspective, if you have a piece of land, you want to be growing as many trees on there as possible. In a lot of cases, there's some exceptions to this, but the more productive the forests are, the more carbon is being stored. So if you have a property that is what foresters call understocked, getting more trees on that land is important because it's more carbon storage. So doing site restoration, if you have an area that maybe was impacted by mining or maybe deer overbrowsing or invasive species, trying to get more trees growing. And I want to point out too, it's not necessarily just trees. Native warm season grasses do a really good job storing carbon in their roots. We have warm season grasses on our land, and this year, a year with a lot of rainfall. When I walk around, there are native grasses that are as tall as me, about 6 foot. And from photos and research, it's been proven that those roots go down sometimes farther than 6 feet. And so a lot of the biomass of those warm season grasses are really underneath the soil, and that's all storing carbon. It's helping with things like erosion. and water quality, but it's also helping with carbon storage. So sometimes warm season grasses might be a really valuable species to plant on an area that you're trying to restore. All right, wood products. I wanted to point this out because it's something that's not intuitive to some folks, but it's an important thing to emphasize. Our wood products do a really good job storing carbon. Our trees do a great job storing carbon in the woods. But I mentioned earlier that I'm sitting on an ash chair and a pine table and oak flooring. It's all storing carbon, and that's called durable wood products. And so, thinking about the whole cycle of what happens in our forest, not only growing trees but also utilizing them, is really important. It's important for resilience, but it's also important for carbon storage, because durable wood products can and do store a significant amount of carbon. So if we're thinking about carbon storage, we need to think about that. Looking at having healthy wood products markets in Pennsylvania is really important. And that's something that the forest products industry is really challenged with right now, losing some of those markets, losing some of the low grade markets that contribute to things like paper, things like shipment pallets, other types of fiber uses. Having those low grade markets is really important. The Bureau of Forestry and other private landowners across the state, we rely on having economic value to those forests to do the important work. So if you're trying to restore an area, often having a logger come in and harvest those trees and do it for an economic where there's economic incentive is really helpful, because it would cost way too much to do that, to have to pay for that work. When there are active markets out there, it really helps keep our forests healthy. But also beyond that, having the markets to store carbon is important. And in this picture, there's something that's called mass timber that's growing across Pennsylvania. There's a lot of interest in Pennsylvania in developing mass timber markets, a lot of interest across the whole country and the world. And that's using forest resources to create larger buildings, buildings typically made with steel and concrete, with wood products. And there are architectural elements that need to be certified through all this. We could have a whole presentation on it. But it's really valuable. It could be really good for Pennsylvania's wood products markets. And also, there are a lot of efficiencies in building with mass timber. And so that's something that's going to be looked at more and more in the future. As I said, there's a lot of interest. But that would help keep our forests healthy and resilient, but it also helps with durable wood products and storing carbon in those buildings. So something to keep an eye out for. Biochar is another interesting one, using low quality wood products in the forest, and going through a process, turning it into biochar that can be used for filtering water in erosion type situations, but also as soil amendments for growing new trees in nursery situations or agriculture. So biochar is something else to keep a lookout for. And that biochar, by the way, continues to store carbon as well. So the products, wood products, healthy wood products markets are really important when we're talking about Penn's Woods and when we're talking about the future. All right, as we move to thinking about people and communities, I think we recognize that we can't do just a good job managing our forest resources, that we also have to engage people. And we talked about that early on. And the Bureau of Forestry has a lot of programs, a lot of partners that we work with environmental educators, going out to schools and engaging students and also adults and learning about forest management. We have outreach when it comes to wildland fire management, which we're going to talk about fire management and carbon and climate just a little bit more here. And watershed and urban forestry programs, really important for climate. Putting trees along streams. It's important for water quality, but also important for storing carbon. When you look at trees in a community setting, thinking about our downtowns and our small towns and our big cities, Those trees are not only storing carbon, but they're also lowering, energy costs by, cooling buildings and keeping them shaded, sometimes blocking wind in the wintertime, but also improving the quality of life of people who live there. So trees in urban environments are really important as well. We talked a little bit about warm season grasses, but the Bureau of Forestry is a very active program in working with landowners to take large expanses of lawn and putting them to work. We call that lawn to habitat program. You think about shallow rooted um, bluegrass and other kind of turf grasses, and you think about replacing them with these deeply rooted warm season grasses and other wildflowers and forbs. Really putting that landscape to work, not only from a habitat perspective, but from a carbon perspective, is also something that's very positive. And then integrating trees into agriculture. It's a field called agroforestry. How do trees help with pastures and growing different kinds of crops and growing fruit trees? And there are definitely, there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of people looking at this, but ultimately it helps put trees on the landscape and make them part of a working landscape. And more trees out on that landscape has a lot of benefits, but it definitely has benefits with storing carbon and mitigating for climate change. Want to spend a few minutes talking about private forest landowners. When we think about forests in Pennsylvania, a lot of times people have this image of Penn's woods up north. You go up to Lycoming or Tioga or Susquehanna counties, and you see these large expanses of publicly owned game lands and state forests, and they are truly fantastic resources for all of Pennsylvania. But 70% of our forests in Pennsylvania are privately owned. So it's that private forest landowner that's out there managing their land, keeping it healthy, keeping it economically viable. It's really important to Pennsylvania. And if we're going to talk about forest management, we really need to pay attention to those private forest land owners. And there's Penn State Center for Private Forests estimated around 750,000. The Bureau of Forestry worked with the Alliance for Chesapeake Bay to create a program this year, more than $4 million to work with landowners to keep their forests healthy and resilient. The funding got allocated very quickly because there is a huge interest out there to do some of this work across our private lands. Bureau of Forestry has service foresters that about 35 service foresters that work in counties and communities across the state to help private forest landowners and help them get on the path of land stewardship and sustainable forest management. So that work is really essential when we're talking about resilience and health. I want to point out our Keystone Tree Fund. You can look online if you're interested in donating, if you have something you want to someone you want to memorialize or a gift or just want to contribute to the effort. There is a relatively new fund called the Keystone Tree Fund, and by donating to that, it will help plant trees along streams and across Pennsylvania communities. So that's something you can promote, or if you choose to donate yourself, that will put directly to work getting more trees across Pennsylvania's landscape. Our third strategic priority, investing in our people and teams. I acknowledged early on that we need that dedicated workforce, of people with expertise and professional background to do this work and engage with our partners. And I want to point out, some of the different ways that we have been adapting. We very recently got hired a forest carbon planner. It was a new item in our budget several years ago. We've also hired invasive species specialists and a forest geneticist to help us work through some of these challenging circumstances and challenging issues that we have to serve Pennsylvania and make our forests more healthy and resilient. We need those folks on board. And it's not just those staff that we mentioned, it's our service foresters, it's all our forestry professionals. And we acknowledge that in this changing environment, there's a lot to learn. So investing in training our staff, that professional development, that working with partners that we have out there to make sure we have all the knowledge and research that we need to be good stewards of our forests. That is something that we really need to keep a focus on, especially earlier with climate. The science is changing, and we're learning more, and we need to keep up on that. But also recognizing that we need to take a more active role in recruiting. Pennsylvania's workforce, looking out ahead, it's a shrinking workforce. So engaging with youth, engaging with students, and getting them excited about working in forestry and ecosystem management, getting them excited about coming to work for a state agency or one of our partner organizations or in the forest products industry. All those things are important. Having people willing to do the work. We'll be in a much different place if in several decades we don't have the workforce that we have now. So we have to invest in that. All right, getting toward the end of the conversation, and want to leave some time for questions. But just wanted to highlight a few things. Wildfires. We are seeing more and more wildfires in Pennsylvania as a result of climate change. We're seeing fires in the summertime, which is something we don't typically see. We've had fires in January, in December. So as Pennsylvania's climate changes, we are seeing more intense. We're seeing more wildfires and more intense wildland fires. And when a forest burns, depending on the circumstances, that can release carbon in the atmosphere. So preventing wildland fire is really important from a public safety, but also from a resource management perspective. At the same time, though, acknowledge that prescribed fire is also a tool for us to manage for healthy, resilient ecosystems. So we can use fire as a tool to keep forests resilient, keep them healthy, encourage the next generation of forests, and especially like species like oaks. Prescribed fire is really important. So all at once, fire is a challenge if it's a wildland fire that we don't want. But it's also a tool if it's prescribed fire, something we're using to manage our forest. So we have to look at it from that nuance. But we are seeing more and more fires as a result of climate change. And this just is a map that just shows all the different fires reported. And you can see there's definitely hot spots in Pennsylvania, but it's common throughout the whole state. And we have a lot of partners that we work with, volunteer fire departments, other state agencies and organizations that help us fight these fires. And obviously it's something that people are really interested in from a public safety perspective, but they might not understand some of the climate resilience opportunities for prescribed fire, or they might not intuitively know that it can have an impact on the health and carbon storage of a forest. We are looking ahead to establish best management practices as it relates to carbon storage, but also climate resilience. Our state forest system is certified by the Forest Stewardship Council and Sustainable Forestry Initiative. So there are a lot of practices that we do that are verified, that conform to those certification standards. And good sustainable forestry in general is good for climate resilience and carbon storage. So if we do more of the practices that we've been doing for many years, we're gonna help advance those things. But I think we acknowledge that things are changing, and we need to keep abreast of the latest science. And what are those things that we can do to tweak our management, just to get maybe a little bit more carbon storage out of our forests, or some things that we can do to make our forests a little bit more resilient, based on things like having better genetic information and more adaptable trees being planted, or some of our silvicultural practices when we harvest trees. Are there different techniques we can use to maintain that resilience? So we always need to be reaching out and challenging ourselves to learn from the science and research, and to learn from our practitioners on the ground, so we can better utilize that experience and information, and also share it with others so they can use it as well. So I wanted to end the conversation on what you can do. There is a lot that individuals can do. You don't have to be a large forest landowner. You can own just a small patch somewhere that you can do things to help our forests in this changing environment. Planting trees, obviously, planting native species is important. If you have a piece of forest land, engaging with one of our service foresters and asking about some of the tools and information out there to help help you steward your forests. There's so if you own land along a stream and want to plant trees, we have expertise that will help you learn how to plant forest buffers along those streams. There are programs with some of our partners called the Family Forest Program, Forest Carbon Program that we can link you to. Thinking about legacy planning. If you own a forest, how do you make sure that forest stays in forest in the long run? There's a lot of information on that. The Center for Private Forests at Penn State that can help guide you in that process. So there's a lot that you can do. Planting trees, learning more information, being active stewards with the land that you have that can help you be a part of that conversation. And I do end it just to thank everybody for your engagement. There is a lot that we could talk about with carbon and climate. There's a lot of research that we can dive into. There are a lot of facts and figures we can dive into, and it does get complex at times, especially when you're talking about carbon management. But really, I don't want us to overthink it. At the end of the day, if we have forest land that we own or we're responsible for, have influence on, be engaged, learn, become an active steward. We don't need to, it can be a complex topic, but we can keep it simple. Plant trees, take care of what you have, ask for advice, and we'll make that the fundamental forests of Pennsylvania a little bit better along the way, make them more healthy, resilient, and help us mitigate climate change. So with that, I'll end and take any questions that you all might have. I have been seeing the chat light up a little bit. I'm not looking at the chat as much, so I'm not sure, Mark, if you're going to moderate. Yeah, but that might be helpful. Yep.
Yeah, Seth, thanks for the great presentation. And I realized that I challenged you to load all of your Bureau of Forestry knowledge into like a 40-minute present. Not even all of it, but thanks for summarizing it and putting it together for us. We will stop the recording here and start a Q&A.